So let's get to our panelists. We're going to start with someone who joined the Blackhawks in 2014. You've likely, if you've been to a Blackhawks game, seen his intermission reports from the United Center, and hopefully you've watched a lot of his work on ChicagoBlackhawks.com. He is Blackhawks TV's reporter, Eric Lear. So our next guest, we're going to get a little bit more into his bio in a minute because I learned something new just last night as I was looking at Wikipedia, preparing, doing that last-minute cramming like we all do. He spent 14 seasons as an assistant coach and head coach in college and in junior hockey before joining the Blackhawks as an amateur scout in 2009. He is currently the team's head USA scout, Mike Donaghy. Our next panelist had a decorated college career, spent 12 years as a defenseman in the National Hockey League, recording 285 points in 500 career regular season games. He was previously the Blackhawks Director of Player Personnel and Director of Player Development before being appointed Assistant GM in 2012. Norm McIver. And our final guest is entering his 18th season as a member of the Blackhawks Hockey Operations Department, his third as Senior VP of Hockey Operations. When I joined the Blackhawks in 2002, he was the general manager of the Blackhawks AHL affiliate, the Norfolk Admirals. He's a member of 3 Hall of Fames. I mean, most of us, 2 at most, right? But he's got 3 Hall of Fames. The Norfolk Admirals Hall of Fame in 2008, ECHL Hall of Fame in 2014, and the St. Francis Xavier University Sports Hall of Fame in 2016. Al McIsaac. So I wanted to get to know our panelists a little bit more and, of course, talk about drafting, as that was the subject of this series. So Al, you attended St. Francis Xavier in Nova Scotia, and I'm looking at your numbers. 112 career points in 91 college games, so more than a point per game. That's impressive, all while racking up 404 penalty minutes. How did you manage to score all those points when you were in the box the whole time?
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. I was disappointed. I thought I should have had more penalty minutes. It just didn't work out that way. St. FX is a small school in eastern Canada, and I was fortunate enough to have gone there as a forward and played my first 3 years as a forward. I was fortunate enough to be MVP 2 of those 3 years, and then they asked me to play defense. We were a little bit short, so I became a defenseman my senior year and was an all-star defenseman. And so my point totals dropped off because I became a defenseman. So I thought I should have had more points, too. But I had a great career in college, and then I was able to turn that into a pro career. And again, he mentioned this earlier, Adam did. 18 years later, I'm proud to be in the Blackhawk organization.
So you started out as part of the Buffalo Sabres organization. You were drafted in the 12th round in 1987. Now, the draft has changed a lot since 1987, including the fact that there were 12 rounds, later 9, now there's 7. But memories of that experience?
Well, I was a little bit like an Andrew Shaw kind of player at the time. I was an overage being drafted. I went through my first draft year, wasn't drafted. Was invited to, at that time, the Quebec Nordiques training camp, and had a good camp, went back to junior hockey, and the Buffalo Sabres must have liked what they saw, and they drafted me. Now, when you get to the 12th round, they're really scrambling for names to find. They're not sure who they're going to draft. They're just looking for anybody. So the fact I was drafted was great. You might as well have been a free agent at that point. I think the draft today at 7 rounds is more specific. We're really looking for players. 7 rounds instead of 12. It makes more sense. But it's a proud day when you're selected. And, I wasn't really in the organization long. I've been in Blackhawks obviously a lot longer. But Sabres were kind enough to draft me, and it means a lot when you look back in 1987.
So how did you find out? Did you just get a phone call from someone with the Sabres?
Well, those days, I had a summer job. I was driving a forklift in a lumber yard, and a guy called the front desk of the lumber company, and he said there's a phone call from the Buffalo Sabres. I walked in with my work clothes on. I'm 18, 19-year-old kid, and they said, "You've been selected by the Buffalo Sabres." I said, "Thank you," and the boss said, "Get back to work." So that was it. It wasn't a lot of excitement.
Well, Mike, I had no idea, but you were a goaltender as a player. You were drafted in 1989, also in the 12th round out of a high school in Boston. And this is the real part I didn't know. You were drafted by the Chicago Blackhawks. So
Yes, I
take
was.
us through that experience.
Well, I guess it meant a lot to me. Unlike Al, they were searching for names at that time just to find out. Yeah, I played Catholic Memorial High School in Boston, which is a pretty good hockey school. Went to Merrimack College and played for Ron Anderson there. But being drafted, there was 5 guys off of our high school team that were drafted. None of us made it. I was the first one.
We've since fired that scout, by the way.
Yeah, he was. Took me 20 years to get an NHL paycheck from the day I was drafted. But the way I found out is the local newspaper, the Boston Herald, there was no phone call from anybody with the team. But my uncle picked up the Boston Herald the next day, and there was just a little blurb, Mike Donahue drafted in the 12th round by the Blackhawks. No shirt, no nothing.
No hat?
Nothing. So it was not
You've
even a handshake.
You've got plenty of swag now, though, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I keep
Well,
Archie up all the time for all the free stuff.
I was all set to bust on Eric over there for being the only person up on the panel who wasn't drafted by an NHL team. But just in case you needed more proof of how much of an inexact science the NHL draft is, Norm MacIver over here, 500 games, 56 Stanley Cup playoff games, went undrafted. So, Norm, take us back to that draft, leading up to it, the draft itself, your expectations.
Well, I think, like Al said, I probably passed over 3 different times in the draft. But looking back, I don't, I was playing junior hockey in my hometown. I don't think there was any chance any NHL scouts were watching any of our games, so I certainly wasn't expecting to be drafted. After my first year at college, obviously I was hoping that it would happen, but it never did, and so I never really. It didn't really bother me. I knew that when my college career was finished, that I had some teammates that had moved on to the NHL, and I was just hoping to follow in their footsteps. And as it turned out, being a free agent wasn't the worst thing in the world, and it worked out for me. So it was disappointing at the time, but it wasn't something that was, I kind of looked at it like, you just keep doing your thing, and hopefully someday that it works out for you.
So if you've seen any of the episodes of On the Clock or you're watching them for the first time, we are going to watch some clips. You'll notice that our cameras had unbelievable access to really highly confidential conversations, and we had the full trust of not only the Blackhawks management from John McDonough and Jay Blunk on down, but everyone you see on the panel here, including Mike, all the scouts, Norm, Al, and of course Mark Kelly, our VP of Amateur Scouting, who you'll see in a moment, and our GM, Stan Bowman. Eric, take the audience here a little bit inside kind of our initial discussions about this series as a Blackhawks TV group. It's something I've wanted to do for years. It seemed like the best time to make a play for it when we were hosting the draft. So as we started talking about this, what were your hopes and expectations for the series?
Well, I guess mainly to kind of learn what the process was. I didn't really know any of the process of scouting and the meetings and everything that goes into it. So I was kind of learning with the viewers as well as we kind of put everything together. But the main thing, I guess, we were hoping to accomplish in this series was just to educate. This is what the process is like. The fans don't only always get to see every angle of the process as you go into it. You just see who, on the stage, here's the pick, and you go from there. So just to kind of show the variety of what's done in each of the 4 episodes, kind of all the preparation leading into the draft, and hopefully kind of educate what the process is like a little bit more.
As a digital content group with the Blackhawks, that really is our focus, is access and trying to take you, the fans, where you otherwise don't get to go. That could be the locker room, it could be the bench at a practice or on a game day, or following a player on their cup day, or in this case, inside the draft room. So let's go ahead and go there now. We're going to show you a clip from episode 1 of the series. Making the list, were really, this was back in May here in Chicago, where the scouts have already done a ton of work at this point, but this is kind of the first real build up to the draft where they start taking all the lists and trying to put them together into one list that they can focus on during the actual event. So let's go ahead and watch that clip.
This is important because this is really where we take the players from the Western Hockey League, players from Russia, players playing high school hockey, and we have to marry them all into one list. Everyone can't see all the players. So it's really up to me to make sure we get a good balance of people crossing over to the various regions and then being able to put that all together.
He's a little guy, but he finds open space.
You know, he reminded me of like the running backs that the New England Patriots get. They're about 5'9". They go right into the hole. I mean, he had no problem going into the paint. Let's go to the USHL.
It's same. They're very close for me.
The drawback is
Transition it and turn it in the NHL goes so far up from junior, and he has challenges at this level. I think he's going to be drafted very high, probably a first-round pick for somebody, but I have concerns with it for us. So
we're trying to build the Chicago Blackhawks. We're not trying to build a list of the best players from, A to Z. We're trying to find the best players A to Z for the Blackhawks.
I encourage divergent opinions based on fact, based on the amount of times that they've seen different players. I want them to be passionate about it, and I really, when they're in that room, I want it to be a titles be damned atmosphere.
The point is, I don't see the comparison there when you say.
No, Daryl, what I'm saying is he was featured in high school. I'm not saying he's playing high school.
I think at the end of the day, everyone's likes their own area better. I mean, that's what you're familiar with, that's what you know, those are the kids you're meeting with.
But I have a hard time putting the two-way guys in there.
So for sure, you're gonna have a little bit more insight and affection for your own league or your own area. But at the end of the day, we want to win games, and if someone from the West is going to be better than someone from Europe or someone from the United States, I'm taking the best kid.
They're probably doing the wrong workouts because they're just lifting to bulk up, but he's got a good frame.
Well, he's got a big frame. Darryl, are they right or wrong?
Well, I think they're wrong. But
what?
I think they're wrong because I had it the other way.
John reiterated that yesterday very well, and Mark's kind of been that way for the 8 years that I've been here. It's you've got to speak up and say what you think, and that's, I think, one of the things that's helped us be successful.
Mark, I'd like to say that they're not wrong. I just don't agree with them.
They're your kids.
Yeah, exactly.
So Norm and Al, you guys have other responsibilities with the Blackhawks and hockey operations, not just focus on the amateur side and the draft. So you haven't seen all of the players that are being discussed in these meetings. Can you just talk about your individual roles and kind of what your agenda is, what you're hoping to take from these meetings, starting with you, Al?
Well, obviously you just saw an opportunity. All of these scouts, some of those are from Europe, some of them from Canada, the U.S., college hockey, junior hockey. We go the whole circuit of people. But for myself, and even Stan Bowman in particular, and Norm, because we run the office, we run the hockey operation day to day with the big team and Rockford, for us to see all these amateur players all over the world, it's very difficult. So when we go into these meetings with our group, we're very confident that they know the players very well. They know their players from their particular areas even better, and then they start cross-referencing. So I know Mike Donahue over here, one of our scouts, our regional scouts, he knows most of the players because he's had an opportunity to go watch what we call the crossover. He'll see his players, and then he'll cross over to see Daryl May's players in Western Canada. He'll go to Europe to watch players. I have to listen, and I learn from what they're telling me, and we trust their judgment on players. Ultimately, when draft day comes, you saw Mark Kelly, our senior vice president or our vice president of amateur scouting. He also has to draw on all of these particular regional scouts their opinions on players, because we're picking 7 to 10 players, and we've got to get it right. So ultimately, we have to trust the people we've hired. And after 10 years of retooling this staff over the last 10 years, we feel we have one of the best staffs, if not the best staff, in the National Hockey League.
Well, I agree with what Al said. Like for our situation, over the course of the season, I might get to see maybe 20 to 25 amateur games. So in those amateur games that I see, there's probably a handful of guys that will be up for discussion for the draft. So basically what I do, and like what Al just mentioned, how we listen, I like to ask a lot of questions. And what you can try to find out in the questions is try to find out the passion from the scouts and how passionate they are about certain players. And you can kind of get a sense when you're asking questions or even when you're talking with them, you can certainly get a sense of who they're really passionate about. And that's what, certainly that's what I try to do, Al, Stan, because like Al said, we don't get a chance to see these players play live in person, so we obviously have to rely on our scouting staff. And so in the position that we're in, I just try to ask as many questions as possible and try to gauge certainly the passion level of our regional scouts.
I just want to make a point. The clip you just saw, you see a little glimpse of a confrontation between two of our particular scouts. I think it was our Western Canadian guy and our Ontario scout. That is a very small piece of the interactions that happen. This is just a glimpse. Those battles are a lot louder. They're a lot more vicious in the meetings because as we talk about individual areas, these guys are fighting for the player they saw and they believe in the most, and they're pitting themselves against the other region's player and that scout who's fighting for his player. So this was a small glimpse, but some of these battles are pretty intense because these guys feel very strongly about the players. They've spent 12 months researching and finding information out on, and we can get into that a little bit later, how hard it is for these guys to get information. But they work very hard, they're very proud of their jobs, and they fight hard for the players they believe in.
I just wanted to add on, you talk about Norm and Al and Stan, you see them in the meetings, but they communicate with us throughout the year. They may read an article about a certain player or read a red line report, and we'll get a phone call or a text. Do we like this player? What do you know about this player? Is it someone we're interested in drafting? And so it's just not in that room where they get the first time they hear the name. It's constantly a process, sometimes 2 years in advance.
Well, following up what Al said, and I'll throw this out to the group, but starting with you, Mike, does it ever get really heated? What do you do if you feel like two scouts can't bridge the gap they feel that passionately?
Well, Mark Kelly's very good at what he does, and as Norm said, we're all passionate about our own players. And Mark's very good with moving the confrontation along. But in the past, we've had guys that have slammed their computer down and have tried to leave the room and didn't work out too
I remember
well.
that one really well. It
wasn't me.
It was a meeting on a tropical island, and one of the things we do for our staff, these guys, like Mike Donahue, he's our one example here, but we have about 15 guys that travel all over in the amateur scouting. And we have a whole nother department called the Pro Scouts. And the Pro Scouts, there's only four guys, and they travel in the big cities, the NHL cities. They get the nicer hotels. These amateur guys are in really small places all over the world. They don't get great hotels. They're in motels at best, and they're traveling by car a lot of places. So once a year, usually in January, we take them to a place, whether it's Mexico or the meeting. Doesn't matter where a meeting is, but we allow them to take their family with them. It's a little give back. And as we're talking about this one particular case, we had a senior scout, and he didn't like the confrontation. And believe it or not, it was with Mike Donahue. And this guy did not like what Mike Donahue had to say. And Mike was just doing, I think you were a newbie, first year on the job. This guy had been here 30 years. And he didn't like it. He slammed his laptop down, picked up his briefcase, and he said, "I'm done, I'm leaving." And I stood up and said, "If you leave the room, you don't work here any longer." And he got to the door frame, turned around, and came back and sat down. I mean, he had 30 years invested. He wasn't going to give up his job. But that's how intense a guy was willing to leave a meeting and basically give up his job because he wanted to fight for a player. And it was a really funny ending to the story. It was a Canadian player. He just happened to be playing in an American city. And the whole argument was, we don't want to draft another American player. Well, he wasn't American. He was Canadian, just happened to play in a American city. So the guy almost lost his job over a mistake. But these things happen a lot. There's a lot of debate. There's a lot of discussion. And it's all for the common purpose and the end result to draft the right player. The Patrick Kane, the Jonathan Taves, the DeBrincats of the world, the new young players. We need to get it right, and they have to battle and in the end come to a consensus that this is the player we're selecting.
So Eric, next year on the clock, maybe some more drama. Can we make up some of these scenes?
A lot of great arguments out on the cutting room floor. But yeah, I mean that's kind of the gist of what we wanted in episode 1 was to show, like John said, he encourages divergent opinion, and we wanted to kind of show to some extent that that things can get heated, that people have differing opinions. Someone sees a player a few times, someone a few more, plays better when you're there. You want to fight for those guys. So it was basically the gist of the segment you saw in a lot of episode 1.
That was the PG version.
PG, exactly. Family-friendly Blackhawks TV. So we want to get to the second clip here from On the Clock, episode 2. Eric, why don't you set up this episode?
Episode 2, we went to Windsor, Ontario for the Memorial Cup. At this point, if you saw in episode 1, we don't really show names. Episode 2, we still weren't really at the point. This is prior to the draft. We weren't showing names, who our scouts are talking about. So rather than kind of covering the tournament and showing how things are going, who's winning, really wanted to show what life is like for the scouts. Like Al mentioned, they're small towns all over the world, cold rinks, snowy drive homes, late nights. So we really wanted to show what life is like as an amateur scout for the Blackhawks in episode 2.
Life for us, we're at home for short stints, and then we're on the road. A lot of airport hotels and a lot of flights and a lot of rental cars. But it's a busy schedule, but it's sort of, I don't know. I've always worked in hockey.
I was drafted by Vancouver back in 1980. Signed on with St. Louis. I think I was up for about 28 games or so. Retired, got out of the game for 10 years. Was in advertising, doing computer graphics.
I'm married. I've been married for coming up on 9 years, and have a 2-year-old. My daughter really enjoys, and she can say Blackhawks.
That's one of the reasons that I did get out of the game for 10 years, was so that I could spend time at home with them. It gave me a chance to coach my son when he was growing up and be a part of his hockey. It wasn't until my son went on to play in the Western League that I got back into the game and pursued it again.
With her being little, you miss parts of her growing up, and FaceTime is a wonderful thing. When I'm on the road, I try and make sure no matter what time, talk to her for breakfast, and that usually means there's some normalcy to the job.
This is the Memorial Cup, which is the winners of the 3 CHL leagues, the Western League, the Ontario League, and the Quebec League, along with the host Windsor. It's the CHL Championship, and a lot of good prospects have come through here.
It's a chance for us to kind of check in on the draft-eligible players on those teams. Obviously, it's nice to have some Blackhawks prospects here as well to see how they do on the big stage. So it's a really good chance to see players raise their level, regular season, playoffs, and then this is championship.
We've got quite a few guys here today, both from the scouting side and the player development side.
Straight ahead or to your left?
All the different teams. You see a lot of their fans travel to this tournament from all over, even if their teams aren't in it. So you get to see a lot of the jerseys from all over. There's Mark right there.
Darryl May.
That's kind of the way the game goes. You move around a little bit. I was fortunate to get some opportunities, and fortunate to get in contact with Mark Kelly to get in with the Blackhawks.
Darryl came on, I'm going to say 2009. Darryl, it was interesting because Darryl had been a general manager at Chilliwack in the Western Hockey League. And Darryl had sent me an email, he was looking for a scouting job, and I told him better to check back after the draft, because that's, if we were making changes, that's what would happen.
It just takes the whole flow of the game out.
And lo and behold, I got another email, and we had a long conversation. Then I went and talked with Stan and Al, John, and the rest is history.
I was assistant GM of the London Knights for 11 years. I worked with them from 2000 till 2011. I joined the Hawks in 2010.
The Blackhawks are proud to select Ryan Hartman.
Ryan Hartman was a player that I was heavily involved in. He joined the Plymouth Whalers in his draft year. Mark Kelly lives right in Plymouth area, and he and I saw Ryan regularly. I interacted with him a lot, spent a lot of time getting to know him, getting to know Ryan throughout the year, and then we drafted him at the end of that season. And and obviously, you know, he's been a part of our organization the last 3 years.
His first National Hockey League goal!
Every time a guy gets called up or becomes a player in Chicago, you feel a part of that success when somebody gets the call or they score their first goal or, you know, can help contribute to us winning games.
So we have 2 more clips, and the last one's a little bit longer than these, so I think I want to go ahead and get to the episode 3 clip here right away. Eric, maybe set that one up, and then we'll come back and talk about 2 and 3.
Sure, yeah, we head to the Combine in Buffalo for episode 3, which was a little education for me, thinking Combine. I'm like, oh, it's just a bunch of workouts, and we're, you know, that's the gist of it, but so much more went into that as we learned when we got there. Interviews behind the scenes, in the suite, kind of a rotating, players are coming in a bunch. Mark Kelly, as you'll see, going from restaurant to restaurant to restaurant in Buffalo, meeting with players, so a lot more to it than that, than just the workouts. So we see a lot of interviews in the Buffalo Combine as well in episode 3.
The hardest test of the day, which is the Wingate test, which is a 30-second all-out test. They just look for how much peak power they're generating, how they sustain the power, and then also what their power is in relationship to their body weight.
You can really see how competitive kids are, because it's easy when they're doing the VO2 and the bike that they're feeling a little bit ill, that they say, all right, I'm going to stop now, and you can get a real sense of the kids' makeup there. I like the agility back and forth. I think you can see the quick feet on guys, and again, how competitive they are in a small distance. Looks like the smaller frame guys are putting up good numbers on the pull-ups. I wasn't a good bench presser either, though. I could do a pull-up.
Some surprised me in testing.
Yeah.
We were kind of quiet in the interview, but then they showed real good drive on the exercise.
Yeah, I wonder what the correlation is there. They're real timid in the interviews, and then they get out here and they're probably in more of a comfort zone, and they're used to doing these things instead of sitting in front of team after team after team.
I think what we're trying to get better, and I think what we're trying to find out is maybe a different way to get the information out of the player. We're open to new ideas. It's constantly evolving, and we've spent the week interviewing. We've interviewed probably in the neighborhood of 80 players this week. What's the biggest difference from last year to this year?
This year I think I played with a lot more confidence, played a bigger role, and I think sort of all the pieces sort of come together towards the end of the year.
This summer, were you invited to the under-18 camp?
No.
Did you feel snubbed by Hockey Canada?
I think so. I definitely think I deserved a chance to try out. I was pretty pissed off, but I think I should have gotten an invite.
If we draft you in 3 or 4 years, you're playing with the Blackhawks. Who would you see yourself playing with? What role?
I think that I could adapt and play many different roles. Obviously with your team, you guys have a lot of offensive talent, and but I think that I can play different roles. It could be a shutdown guy, or I could be a top 6 guy and help out offensively.
What's your dad do?
Homicide detective.
In Halifax?
Yeah, for Halifax Regional Police.
Sometimes does it affect his mood when he comes home?
No, not really. Not that I've noticed. Yeah. I mean, he keeps what he sees pretty close to him. He doesn't share too much, but I don't notice it.
If someone in this room had never seen you play before, give me an NHL player you play similar to.
I think I try and compare my game to Tays. I think that we play similar style, and I try and do as much as I can from his game and put it into mine. I like watching him play as a player and and as a person, the way he carries himself.
Was this a good year, a bad year?
I wanted to prove the coaches wrong by, trying too hard to impact the game too much.
You power play or penalty kill. If you could take one player from your under-18 team and play with the rest of your life, who would you take? When did you seriously consider the university route? What other schools were you looking at? Any concussions? Any questions for us?
We want kids that we can put in a locker room with Jonathan Toews and Duncan Keith and Patrick Kane, and your name gets associated good and bad with who you draft from what area they come from. So you want to do your homework. You're going to bat for these kids. You're battling for them all year. Ultimately, you're hoping they're going to be Blackhawks. So you want to make sure they're the highest of character.
Perfect, good. All right, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah.
I thought the whole week went well. I thought preparation was, as good as it gets. So, and I think in talking to the players, that was reflected well. I will, in the next day or two, what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it up. I'm going to give everyone probably about 7 guys, and some people will be getting the same player, but those are the guys I'm going to want you to get to know very well and give me some added information on, okay? What I really want to know is the players that you have the passion for, the guys that are going to make a difference for us.